uh, contribute with promotion and preservation of Bangla, which is a major language, and other 37 languages, most of which do not even have own script. Now, having said that, I will just mention 3 points. The IMLI should develop a long-term plan for preservation of Bangla as well as the minor language. Minor language will certainly get attention, but Bangla also needs attention because we see that the new generation, the Facebook generation, have started writing Bengali in Roman script. We have to think something, we have to think about this. And I'll also emphasize inclusion of dialects in our scheme of activities. And then finally, given that there is a serious resource constraint, we have to set priorities. Thank you very much, and I particularly thank Professor Dr. Zinatin Kezari to give me an opportunity to come here today and speak before you and share my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now invite questions from the audience. Please.
I'm Professor Dr. Afroza Yasmin. I'm working actually as a professor of sociology, but because of my multidimensional interest, I'm also very much actually interested in language, culture, and so on. So my question is to you, that you have mentioned that it's minor language. So could you please actually, make any sorts of difference? Would you like to mean that it's minor language means ethnic language? And yes, and my other question is that how many minor languages, the written scripture, have you been discovered so far? Is there any number? Could you please mention that here? Because most of the ethnic language does not have actually written scriptures.
Right. For this presentation,
thank you so much.
Thank you. A minority language is any language which is usually demographically inferior and normally not used in any public function. That is a minor language for my purpose today. Such a language is therefore marginalized over time as it is excluded in national affairs. As a result, the speakers tend to shift to the more privileged language like Bangla first of all, and then English. I do not necessarily call an ethnic language to be minor because it is an ethnic language, but because it is being, for natural reasons, social reasons, traditional reasons, many factors operate. These are kind of elbowed out of the mainstream.
Okay. You have
in Bangladesh, there is 37 languages, and as I discovered in the in the Language Exchange Fair in National Museum yesterday, there are 6 languages which have their own script. Written script, yes.
Written scripts.
Yes, even there are books, some of the textbooks, like primary level. Yeah.
And you are calling the rest of the language, those are also minor languages?
Yes.
Okay. So I have little bit confusion about that, the connotation you are using, that minor.
May I
yes.
I think minority language is a better term. Minor language, major language, and it implies an evaluation of the languages. We should avoid that, I think.
That's the thing. So I found it a little bit difficult actually.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay, for giving me that. That's the thing.
All languages have equal status.
Okay, thank you so much for your good presentation. I am Mehin Nahar Shapna from Save the Children in Bangladesh as a project director of Multilingual Education Program and also curriculum committee member of Bangladesh government program. So I have one question actually. We are actually operating multilingual education program in CHT. So on that time we had to do the struggle because there is no mapping, no census, how many languages are in Bangladesh. Some people say that 37, 38, 75, 45. So my question is there any mapping or any census that how many languages are in Bangladesh?
Thank you very much for the question. I'm not an expert, as I said, but when I was referring to the figure 38, I took the figure from ethnic law, which is, I think, a very resourceful organization, and they have these statistics that there are 38 languages. But I'm also aware of the fact that there's a debate about this, that there are 37 or 38 languages. And I think Professor Kubdishwar would be in a better position to clarify if there is a real language census carried out in the recent time.
I don't think there has been. But they are going to plan one ethno-linguistic survey, as Dr. Kamal Nasser Chaudhary said this morning. So, okay, thank you very much. Oh, one more.
Last question.
Okay, please.
Yes, I'm Ifat Wajid, and I'm professor of applied linguistics at Dhaka University, and I'm also the director Institute of Modern Languages. I have a question. I'm a bit confused. I have seen that the word Bengali and Bangla is being used interchangeably. What should we use if you are saying, if you want to mean the language? Because I've been asked a number of times, should we say Bangla language or Bengali? So you have used it a bit interchangeably. I would like a little bit of clarification on that.
It has been used interchangeably for about hundreds of years.
Exactly.
So,
and do you think it's time
I
to
think
maybe...
for this meeting,
Yes.
who will be
Okay.
using that?
No, the thing is, maybe we should think about it. Another
I think
question is...
we should switch over to Bangla in time, in good time.
Yes,
So, thank you.
exactly, I agree with you. Another question is that we are saying, you asked a very good question, whether Bangla is under threat or not. It is a huge, I mean, it's a big language for us. It's been used by a huge population.
May I intervene in that? Because the UNESCO has a list of endangered languages, in which English, German, etc., they have zero possibility of being endangered. And Bangla has number 1. That means it also has very less possibility of being endangered, but it follows English. English is 0. So that's it. I mean, so
my question, I haven't completed the question. My point is that I found recently that Bangla is slowly moving out of the academic as an academic language, because in Dhaka University most of the books are in English. And I have found these days that most of the private universities that have, the meetings that I have attended, they are delivering all the speeches
Thank you.
in English.
If we go into that question, there will be no end of it. I'm sorry. We'll have a different forum for discussing that problem. Thank you very much. That's the last question. Yeah.
My name is Ainul Nahar. I'm professor of anthropology, Jamnagar University. I have some supplement question. First of all, I think that when we use the term minority and majority, it should be considered as a problematic word, because all are constructed by the dominant people. And the second thing is that when you are talking about, I think that I feel that your definition is problematic when you say the minor languages, because and later on, I understand that you are talking about the indigenous people's language. Even you are talking about the indigenous people's language as minor language or the language of the minority people, then I think that still there are lots of debate going on, because in Pavitra Sarkar's paper, I have found that there are 26 and you are saying that 37, and some people, they claim that there are more than 80 languages. So I think that whenever we present these, we have to be very careful about that. And my question, another question is that, are you looking at the other minority people in your definition as well, like what I'm saying, that in addition to the ethnic minority people, there are many kind of minority people, especially in terms of caste and many other things. Like there are Dalit people who also have their own languages. So I think we have to also include all these things. Thank you.
We will accept your observations. I won't let you answer on that. I think, yeah, we accept your observation. and let it go at that. Thank you very much. I don't think we can take any more questions. I don't think.
It's not a question, sir. It is an information that I want to share.
Yeah, please. Okay.
For your kind information, we have started our survey, that is the ethno-linguistic survey of Bangladesh. We have prepared many things. We appointed our researchers, consultants, both subjective specific and technicals, and very soon, within this month, we will arrange a training workshop, and then we will go to the fields for necessary work.
Observation also.
And another question raised here. It is related to Bangla and Bengali. Bangla and Bengali. Okay.
All going to first question. Thanks very much for your interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much, the paper presenter. I just want to share an information. Recently, Research and Development Collective has conducted a survey with support from UNESCO, and this has been published as a book by UNESCO, supported by Campaign and others. And we have found out that currently in Bangladesh, the pre-primary and primary education is being provided in 43 different languages other than Bengali. So 43 different languages are being used for providing pre-primary and primary languages. And maybe, some people ask me whether these include dialects. I can reassure you that none of these are dialects. These are languages.
Thanks for the information. Naira Khan, Assistant. No problem.
On the road. I would like to first start by thanking the International Mother Language Institute for the invitation to come and speak to you today, and also take note of the quality of the welcome that I received. From the airport to today, I have been accompanied, and I thank you very much for this. I truly hope that this is just the beginning of a dialogue, an international dialogue, and it is truly an honor for me to be here today. The next step now is to get the presentation on. The language and other languages, struggles for equality. I think that as soon as we talk about, and the discussion we've just had points it out, we talk about minority languages, ethnic languages, and so on and so forth. These are all very political issues. I would use, in fact, the term minorized language. It is a process. It is not a fact that one language is a minority and another one is not. And I think that is one question that we must always keep to the forefront of our discussions of languages. For example, Bengal was a minority language up until 1971, after which it became more of a dominant language. So it's a process that's always ongoing. I come to you from French Canada, and not the province of Quebec, where French is a majority language, but from other provinces where French is in fact a minorized language. So different languages have different places in society based on social, economic factors and also historical factors. So today, and before I get on with myself, today I'm going to talk to you a bit about my own knowledge base, where I come from, what I study, just so that we can get some form of baseline to discuss. Then what we know, based on what I have done in studies and within my own country, what we need to know, I think is a very important question. Where are we going? What do we want to do today? And the possible contributions of the IMLI, or IMLI, as you say. I think that is a very pertinent question today. So the first question is, what is a mother language? I could have asked, what is a language? We talk about language, dialect, and so on. Well, a language is one dialect amongst many. A standard language is a dialect, much as any other form of the language is. So mother language comes from the Romance languages, the very notion of a source language, so a language that would have an actual beginning, an actual place, so something that is a fact, or a language of the mother, as in mother tongue, and by extension, the first language spoken. But according to the UN, I checked this on the website just before coming, in the context of International Mother Language Day, we are concerned with all languages used by peoples of the world. So in this case, we can consider English, French, German, Dutch as mother languages, as well as all the languages that are displaced by colonization or in the name of nationalism. So my knowledge base then is in the fact of language as an important aspect of nation building in Canada. As you may know, Canada is an officially bilingual nation and an officially multicultural nation. So it is not a multilingual nation. And this comes through in research data. So I have 3 principal research sites, which are 3 provinces. It's important to know that in Canada there are provincial educational systems and not one federal system. And this makes for very, very important differences. New Brunswick then is a small province which has official bilingualism, French and English of course, and 33% of the population is Francophone. And we also have First Nations. We use the term First Nations to speak about indigenous people. Sorry, I have a problem with that word. Because it's in recognition of the fact that they were there as the first peoples of America. And of course, and we speak very, very little in New Brunswick of other languages of what we call immigration. In Alberta, 2% of the population is Francophone. There are First Nations and multiple language communities. And in Canada, we have developed the term allophone to speak about these other language communities. So the languages of immigration, or the language of the first pioneers, be it Ukrainian, German, Spanish, Italian, okay? They're called allophones. And in Ontario, where just 4.5% of the population is Francophone, and Ontario is the home of Canada's National Capital Region, there are First Nations and multiple language communities, the allophones. So what we know, based on like I say, I work with French, so it's a particular issue. When you have an international language which is minorized in a country, it's often difficult for people to grasp the idea that French could be the language of a linguistic minority. But what we know is that conditions which favor language maintenance in terms of French, the status of the language, social, economical, and cultural. French is very much of a French has the benefit in Canada of having official status. There are laws, there's even French, the right to French language education is part of our constitution. So we have rights to schools, to universities, and so on, which brings a lot in terms of language maintenance. So access to and identification with a community's practice. And here we see the difference between a population of 2% and a population of 33%. When there are 2% of the population who speak French, it's very difficult to have a community of practice. And so there's more loss of French in those areas. Access to and control over institutional space, first of all schools, but also universities, hospitals, and so on. And it seems that there's a link between the existence of language wars and mobilization, and the maintenance of a language. So if there is political turmoil over the use of a minorized language, speakers of that language will have a greater tendency to want to maintain that very language. So there's raised consciousness and so on. So here's a comparison, Ontario and New Brunswick. There's the status of French, official language in New Brunswick, and in Ontario, the biggest minority language, and also protected under certain laws. There's geographical proximity between communities. So it's possible to actually speak in French outside of the school and outside of the home. There's institutional space that is very well established, but it is still fragile at times. So when, for example, there's economic difficulty in the province, then there's automatically a question of, should we really be preserving French? What is bilingualism really important? Those French people are taking the jobs away from the English people, and so on. So it's still a minorized language in that sense. In Alberta, the status of French is very different. It is viewed as one language amongst many. And there's a lot of discussion about why French should have this special status. Why shouldn't it be Ukrainian, for example, which was a language of some of the first pioneers to the Western countries. So, and the communities are much more dispersed. Therefore, it's very difficult to go to a shop and speak in French. So the language has lower status. The institutional space is fragile and contested. So why should there be French schools, but not Ukrainian schools or Italian schools? And why not schools in which we use the language of the First Nations? Because we have to be very honest, in Canada there was a whole process of trying to extinguish first. The fact that English is the first language. It's just, that's what the case is, and there's no way to change it. So we still live in a situation of English hegemony. I'm sorry, I'm used to saying this in French, so it's languages hegemony. Okay. There's also a problem of English in the lives of children in society, at home, and in school. At grade 5, French children stop using French and start using English instead. So, and I think it's very close to what we were saying on the internet, Facebook. They use English. So there's a fear of what we call assimilation or language loss, okay, and especially intergenerational language loss. And there's also, interestingly, a debate about language quality. What counts as French? Who's French? Why? Which language for which people? And now that we are facing a situation in which there's much more immigration from French Africa, for example, this question of which French for which people is very important. Do we take Canadian French as the standard that everybody must speak, or do we have multiple varieties of French as socially acceptable? What we need to know, I take from the UN site again. Basically, so I found that the UN site was very interesting in terms of a vision, but very little in terms of what we could actually do, which of course is not surprising. So basically, how do we promote the dissemination of mother languages to serve not only to encourage linguistic diversity and multilingual education, but also to develop further awareness of linguistic and cultural traditions throughout the world, and to inspire solidarity based on understanding, tolerance, and dialogue. So how do we do it? How do we go beyond the construction of databases about languages? How do we go beyond the fact that I will learn to speak my mother tongue, but the national language is still unique? I think that all the while we recognize that heritage is not all language is about. We often speak about mother tongues as important for our heritage, but I think heritage is the past. We must be looking towards the future as well. I think also we need to develop e-communities of researchers. How can I continue this dialogue with you? And I think that that is probably the first thing that the Institute needs to take as well, is decide where they want to go, whether it's towards preservation of something that exists already and to be apolitical, to view language as neutral, or do you in fact want to see it as language as a way of developing understanding, tolerance, and dialogue, therefore looking straight in the face of the politics of language and saying, how do we make it possible for everyone to have a voice and not expect them all to always speak in English and put up that barrier for dialogue? So it's a very difficult question. How do we respect, accept, recognize all the languages and inspire, make possible interlanguage communication? thank you very much. Once again, I'm proud to be here today.
Thank you, Mr. That's my problem. Sorry. Please. If you have any questions. Yeah. It's not working.
Oh, okay. And my question is that in Canada, you've got bilingual education, you've got French and you've got English. But what's being done about the First Nation languages that you've got? For example, the Kanawaki, the Mohawks. Are their languages being incorporated into primary school education?
First of all, I must say that I'm not a specialist of this, so I don't know how many. I can't give you numbers. But I know that many languages were extinguished by the colonizers. They were very young children were taken away from their families, sent to institutional schools, and their home language was beaten out of them, literally. So I don't know how many First Nations languages still exist, in fact, but I do know that there are many revitalization projects ongoing, and that, in fact, there's a model being put forward and being used in certain communities where the elders, so what in my culture we call grandparents, are brought into schools, and they are the ones who develop, based on the New Zealand model, language nests, so that the elders will teach the language to the younger children. So basically there's a generation of parents today do not speak their language, but the hope is that through education, through primary education, that the language will come back, be used again. And I can also say that there are many First Nations artists who sing in their native tongue. So there is some of that going on. So that's about the best answer I can give you. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yes, and basically at one point the dominant language of the community, which is English, becomes the dominant language for the show.
Yeah, that will be the last question. Yeah.
Dhaka, and actually I graduated from McGill, Canada. So welcome to Bangladesh.
Thank you.
I'm not a language expert, but I'm just curious about how would you distinguish between linguistic nationalism and multilingualism? That I would like to learn from you. And another point is that whether you have any, like when I studied in McGill, I haven't seen any indigenous students in the university. So any indigenous or native students. So I'm just curious whether the government has come up with any policy to give them access to higher education, tertiary level. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I've written down your second question. Okay, first of all, linguistic nationalism is, for example, in French Canada, when there were battles over the access to French. So because for a long time, the French language was a language which was disallowed in schools. So linguistic nationalism is normally based in one language. Okay, so the Corsican language nationalism is the same thing. It's a question of how do we take one language out from under oppression and bring it up to a better social status. Whereas multilingualism is this notion that that all languages have a space within a state. Okay, but often what happens with linguistic nationalism is that we are focused on only one language to the exclusion of other languages. And we see that in Canada where there's a fear somewhere that other languages than French will gain in status because then that might take away from French. So there's this ongoing struggle. Okay, it comes from this idea that power is finite, instead of seeing that perhaps with multilingualism all languages could flourish and it won't take away from French. Okay, and we also have in Canada linguistic nationalism for English. There's the movement for the preservation of English, okay, in which Anglophones want English to be the sole national language because they feel threatened by the position of French. Okay, so these nationalisms divide languages more so than it probably should be. Whereas multilingualism, it's much more open. Is that?
Yes.
Okay, and for the other one, that
impetus, but I think the first thing that would have to happen is that Native students finish. So, and I realize I've just created a social category, but just staying on to grade 12 is a big issue. There are communities in which children, I think that has to happen before we can go into tertiary education. However, there are, for example, at the university program, there's a First Nations Center for Excellence in which they welcome First Nations students to the university and do what they can to make it culturally prevalent for them. That's not the right word.
See, we are one presentation behind, and we have crossed over our scheduled time. But I would hate to cut off our normal presentation time. So please, I hope we are more hungry for knowledge than we are for food. Please.
Since we are on a time crunch, I was actually originally supposed to present on using digital tools for the preservation of languages. Actually, as a linguist, I work with syntax and computational linguistics and implementation of syntactical structures, and I work mostly with Bangla. But my introduction to the minority